Why is the most expensive space on campus often the least measured? And what can institutions do about it? Welcome back to another Bowtie Tuesday. I'm again joined by Andrew Sama from Huron as we dig into another finding from our State of Space Management survey. We've talked a lot about portfolios, hybrid work. Today, we're turning to research space, a big topic on a lot of campuses. Leaders feel confident about classroom data, but far less confident about labs, even though research space is often one of the most expensive places on campus. So, Andrew, this feels like another next frontier for space analytics. And maybe just to lead, there's a couple data points that I want to bring out for us to discuss that we found from our survey. So, point number one, 58% of the respondents feel confident managing instructional space, while only 32% feel confident managing research space. Just 10% regularly report research dollar density, all while knowing that labs cost 3 to 5x more per square foot than academic space. And so, Andrew, my question to you is why the lag, right? Why has research space been slower to receive some of this analytical rigor?
Yeah, I think I would clarify one point on some of the metrics you just shared. I mean, I think the way we framed the question was, are they confident in the data? Right. Like,
Hmm.
so I think, folks are certainly managing these types of spaces, right? But I think, the data that surrounds it and supports that decision making, I think is not always got the highest level of confidence, as it relates to research space. I think the classroom data is more, they have more confidence in this. My speculation would be, and I think some of what we saw in the comments would be that it's inherently sort of structured, right? Classrooms are scheduled, they're codified, they're standardized. So that analysis is just sort of easier to do. And some of those data structures, I think, are really old and well established through the Office of the Registrar in most institutions, right? So,
Well, there's a forcing function, right? We got to put
right,
students in
exactly.
class every
Exactly.
semester, right?
Exactly. Research space isn't like that, right? It doesn't have that same forcing function, right? So labs are going to vary widely by discipline, by the type of equipment, by their safety needs, the workflows, and the data that just is existing around them is not as consistent and easy to wrangle, right? The other thing is there's a lot of sensitivity around labs, right? Take whatever the emotion people might have around their office space, right? And sort of multiply that, I think, around labs in many cases.
No doubt.
They're very specialized spaces, right? People have built those out often over many years. And so there's just a real inertia in sort of changing allocations at times, right? But as you alluded to, costs are high, right? It's 3 to 5 times more expensive per square foot than most other spaces on campus, right? So it's really important that institutions start to get their hands around this, and that's the opportunity I think that the survey results show us. And what's interesting, I think you mentioned this maybe at the top, but this survey respondents are primarily R1s, places that
Right.
will have a very large portion of this kind of space, right? And they still have, to some extent, lower confidence in the data. So it's a real opportunity, right, to do more here.
Well, and I also think over the past year, right, with the different administration changes, the amount of extra pressure, right, the amount of
Yeah.
cost of research dollars is all of a sudden this has put right this space on campus under a microscope. And so when we think about how do we evaluate some of this space better and some of the metrics that we might use, is research dollar density is that still the right starting point for institutions, or
I think it's
what
a
other metrics should we consider along with that maybe?
Yeah, it's a really important one, right? But I won't say it's the only one, right? I think research dollar density is relatively simple, relatively scalable, right? To compare research output to, relative to space. There's a little bit of complexity in working through how you calculate it and how you use it, but I think it's something that leaders can just generally get their head around, which is good. I think there's some trickiness in how you come up with developing the right ranges by which to gauge the performance on RDD in a particular space, right? So as the simplest example, a 250 square foot computer science sort of dry lab that generates $1 million in grants is going to have a lot different RDD than the 2,500 square foot, wet lab or mechanical engineering lab, right? That is
Right.
generating the same amount of money, right? So you have to be mindful of those different modalities when you're looking at the numbers and doing anything with them. But I think it's so that for that reason, we think RDD is best when paired with some other sort of lightweight contextual indicators, right? You don't need a big dashboard. You don't need a dozen different metrics, right? I think you need to have enough to make the conversation fair and grounded when you're thinking about, how we're allocating space, right? So a nice one that I think a lot of institutions lean on and may even start with because is square feet per research FTE, right? And that's just something that's going to help you identify real clear outliers in terms of amount of space relative to a team size, right? And then I think you need some group of metrics, right? And this doesn't need to be 20 things that help you understand sort of scholarly impact, right? This could be
Right.
publications, citations, markers of academic contribution or strategic importance to the institution, right? I think if you have those things, you've got a good set of information to start thinking about where are my outliers, and you always, I think, want to start by looking at the tails, right? Where do I
Mm.
have space that looks really, really productive, or where do I have space that looks really unproductive? And don't worry about the middle and in the beginning, So I think those are some of the metrics, and then I'll pause there. There's more to talk about, but I think that's a good place.
Yeah, it makes me. Well, I was just thinking in my head, right? Is RDD is almost a kind of like a lagging indicator, right? In the
Sure.
sense of it's, hey, what's been done and where am I now, but not necessarily a leading indicator of what's going to happen in the future. Is there any way you think about, like, are we on the right track, either between departments or just how we evaluate our space?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, you can certainly, for more mature institutions that can pull all this data together, I think you can start to look ahead to grant proposals, right?
Right.
And sort of try to be a little more future looking. In the current environment, that could be very tricky.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would expend a whole lot of energy at the moment pursuing that. I think if there's another area to think about around this topic, right? It's the policy framework that you sit all this inside of, right?
Mm.
We think it's really important that you have some alignment between, a provost, a VP for research, or a vice chancellor for research, and your deans, right? That they understand here's how we're going to use these numbers, right? We understand what they mean. We understand there are rational exceptions, right? Early career faculty, startup periods, unique research modalities, and that we're not trying to institute some sort of regime where you miss the target, you lose your space. That should
Right.
never be the
Right.
intent of this, right? It's more of a structured way to have conversations and to surface outliers, right? In both directions. You may have outliers who are underperforming and that we think, oh, maybe they don't need as much space, but you may have outliers who show in an analysis framework like this as people who, hey, how do we help this group grow? How do we help this
Right.
research group,
They're onto
do more,
something. They're
right?
getting more
Exactly.
funded. We need to do more of this. So speaking of that, right? So like if kind of first steps type of mentality, right? If, like, what's the realistic first move for institutions wanting better visibility given everything that's happening, including faculty sensitivities, you name it?
Yeah. We see this kind of happen in two ways. And I think either one is fine, given your institution and your realities. You could go either way. I think one is sort of the bottom up approach, right? So there's a particular college that is maybe feeling the crunch of space allocation more so than another. And they just start to kind of create a framework like what we've discussed, right? A suite of metrics, a policy, a group of leaders who are thinking about this together. And they just start to do it within the scope of their control, right? The other way to do it is more of a top-down approach where you bring together, like I said, that provost, VPR, CFO grouping, and develop a framework like this. I think first within that group, and then bring it around and shop it, if you were, as it were, to the deans and kind of bring them
Mm.
along, build that coalition. We've heard a couple times about building a coalition. It can happen that way too. Right. I think it's about where are the pressure points in your institution? Where do you have leaders that are willing to push on this? Every institution is going to take a different approach, but those are sort of the two ways that we see it. And then, I'll just reiterate things I've said each week, right? Use pilots, start small, right? Create some proof of concept, and especially with this particular topic, bring your faculty, along in the
Totally.
process. I think a unique thing, which I alluded to earlier around this particular topic, is just underscore that you're not penalizing low performers, you're stripping space, right? This emphasize that there's going to be rational protections, right? Early career faculty supporting interdisciplinary work, right? You need to make sure people understand the intent behind a framework like this. It's just you don't want unproductive space to linger. Right. Everybody understands
Totally.
there's up and downs in a research, life cycle, right? And I think people will be rational about that. But when we get 3, 4, 5, 6 years on and a lab is not productive, right? That's real cost to the institution. So how do we avoid those situations, I think, is the framework here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, fundamentally, right? No one wants to be micromanaged with their space and every action that they take, and instead, it's how do we, create better visibility that actually enabling better governance, right, of our space and clear rules, so that if you're trying to understand what do I need to do to be successful here, right, or to get more space, or to get more lab, or to get more FTEs, or whatever it is, it's like the rules are just more defined, right, or more clear on how can I succeed.
And, I think there's another concept here that I would just toss out for folks to think about. You talked about, how do we make this more future looking? And I don't know that there's an analysis piece that I would point to, but there is a design piece I think is really interesting for
Mm,
schools to start thinking about, right? And that is, how are you building and classifying your labs? Right. If every lab is a custom built, highly specialized space, even if you get this framework right, where you're identifying high and low productive labs, and you have an ability to maybe make some reallocations, the process of making the reallocation is going to take a really long time. Right.
sure.
And so you can speed that up and get quicker. Right. Maybe I can't see further down the road. Right. But I can get quicker in making the changes if I get thoughtful about the design standards in labs. So instead of having everything be custom, is there half a dozen? Is there a dozen lab types that we can come up with, right? Typologies of labs that become a little more interchangeable, and that help me with planning, these sorts of puzzle piece moves across a larger portfolio. We've worked with some clients and we've seen some things developed around more modular, flexible lab
Right,
typologies that I think
right.
is really important. And I would argue some of there's the potential to some of the construction materials and the approaches may start to support this a little more in the future too. So those are kind of the future looking horizon level things I would be thinking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's not as much about creating, let's say, black box labs as much as how can I maximize my optionality for the
Yep.
future, so that as research changes, as demands change, whatever, that I don't have to totally reduce spaces, that they can be flexible.
Yep.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic first inaugural State of Space Management survey. Super, super pleased to be doing this with you all and release some of these results. I know that you've enjoyed it, I think, as much as I have.
Oh, this is so exciting. I think the industry needs, to be talking like this to one another and to be hearing what's successful and to be hearing how people are thinking about, some of these problems. I really look forward to sharing these results widely with everybody, across higher ed, and to doing this moving forward, right? So please reach out to us. Please talk to us. We want to know that you're using these results. I think these kind of survey results can help with conversations on campus.
Totally.
And, we want to do that for you. So tell us what you're learning from the results. Tell us the questions that you have. Tell us what you want to see in the 2026 version, because we're really excited to be doing this for the community.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It's been another Bow Tie Tuesday. Andrew, until next time.
All right. Take care.